And I did call to talk about serious things.
Okay, good.
And actually, it's interesting. I just wanted to take a side note because I was interested in what Anthony was saying about street epistemology because recently in my Christian walk, I've taken a conference and I've become a street preacher, and we sort of take the same kind of track that he takes. We'll talk to people about their beliefs and find out why you believe what you do, and then we'll share why we believe what we do, and we'll have a little discussion right there on a street corner, like in Toronto, Dundas Square.
Honestly, I in a way, I kind of admire what you're doing because I think that's probably the best way to get through to people is to have a conversation with somebody. Now, when I go out and do this, I don't try to promote a worldview. Yes, I want to understand what they believe, why they believe it, and how they're so sure. But then once we recognize that Carrie, for example, doesn't have a good reason to believe that there's a God, I don't then give her, I don't know, the link to the Atheist Experience website or something like that.
Well, just if I can chime in, because I've watched some street epistemology videos, and I don't do street epistemology, but one of the things I do notice is that the ones that I've seen have been very hesitant to share their personal views.
Honestly, I like to hold back on telling people where I stand on it. In fact, in that conversation with Carrie, if I'm not mistaken, she wants to know where I stand. Mm-hmm. And I'm a little reluctant to because I don't want my own views to taint the conversation.
Well, I've actually seen sidestepping, not dishonest, but just a way to kind of say, let's steer away from my views and let's just talk about what you think.
I usually say something like, can we, I'll be glad to answer that when the timer goes off.
Well, when I watched Reed, for example, someone asked him about something like that, and his response was something like, I want to know, I want to look for good ways to tell what's true. Sure. That's my position, is just finding ways to determine the truth.
Yeah, so
valid ways.
Yeah. So when you engage with people, are you truly interested in the reliability of how they're coming to their beliefs, or do you think that you have the answer for them, and then do you use it as an opportunity to promote your view?
Well, honestly, obviously, because I'm going out in the venue, we're going out in a venue of street preaching the gospel. But we do have open dialogues and discussions, and a lot of the conversations that have taken place with people I've met on the street have made me think about my beliefs and reassess things, and it's actually strengthened my faith because it's like, hey, I never thought about that before. I'll go away and I'll think about it. I'll do some research, and it's like, yeah, actually, that does make sense. That's good.
I mean, that's the whole benefit of the dialogue. Mm-hmm. Like, whether you're doing it from your point of view or I'm doing it from the street epistemology view, like, I want to drive towards truth. I want to understand what people believe and how they're so sure and believe what they believe if they have a good reason for it.
I'm not trying to push my view on anybody. I'm just exercising my freedom of speech and expressing what I believe, and then engaging in anybody that wants to engage with me. Yeah. And then we'll have a dialogue, and I'll say, this is why I believe what you do. Why do you believe what you do? And
so if Anthony were to ask you, what's your lead in, Anthony?
Well, I guess my lead-in is...
You see Mark on the street and you say...
Yeah, I just kind of want to get a sense of why you actually... Well, what do you mean by God specifically? Is it a specific religion? And why are you so sure that it's true? Maybe what is your main reason? And then I like to shift into the how. That's kind of the most important thing, is how are you determining that this God is real, or that was actually a miracle that happened? That's kind of what
I sort of take the William Lane Craig approach, the causal, the watchmaker argument, the cosmological argument that, nothing, it's not physically possible for something to come from nothing, that logically speaking, that there must be something to cause everything. Mm-hmm. And I know there's scientific debates back and forth. Lawrence Krauss has made his book, A Universe from Nothing. So I'm not saying I know 100% for certain that God exists. I'm just saying that I have a higher confidence that there is a creator than that there isn't.
Did you
put my money on the side that there is a creator. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Did you become more confident in your belief in the God after you discovered those arguments, or were you just as confident as you were before you discovered those?
Well, I grew up in an agnostic, non-religious home, and I spent years looking at this and researching it and just looking around at everything. Like, I know you guys heard all these arguments before. This is nothing new under the sun for you. But just to quickly go over it, you look at things like cars and buildings and stuff, and it's like, Well, if someone was to tell me that just, stirred up out of a storm in the desert, I think the guy's crazy. So why should I believe that the universe and all life on Earth just stirred up out of a storm, and here we are? That there must be an intelligence behind it.
Well, wait, can I just interrupt and ask a quick question? And I don't want to derail it, but according to your belief, that crazy storm in the desert is actually the building.
If everything is designed, then everything would be...
There's no such thing as a non-designed thing, so the wreckage from a desert storm is, to you, evidence of design.
No, okay, I know that. I understand the circular reasoning in that aspect, but it's still like, I don't know. Like I said, I've listened to the arguments back and forth. Like, I know you're aware of who John Lennox is, Trace. You've had a caller on one of your past shows tell you about him. He had an interesting rebuttal to Lawrence Krauss. He said the fact that the universe is intelligible is evidence that there must be an intelligence behind it, because it's never been demonstrated that intelligence can come from non-intelligence.
I'm still curious, though, about, up to you, a pile of rubble is just like a skyscraper, right?
Yeah, that was simplifying the argument, but to expand on it and make it more complex, like, we can make mathematical models and predict the movements of planets from cosmic structures all the way down to subatomic structures, and we see a symmetry between quantum physics and astrophysics.
Okay.
And every scale between.
Here, I have a story I'd like to tell. I thought about this earlier. Someone asked me if I had anything to talk about, and I was like, I have a little story, but I didn't tell it. And this is weirdly appropriate. I was at a party last night, and there were several magicians working this party. And one of them did a trick, and a person in the audience chose a card, right? Pick a card, any card. And they happened to choose the 3 of clubs. And so the magician went on and on doing all these tricks, and they kept showing up the 3 of clubs. So they would shuffle the deck and do all kinds of crazy things with the deck, and then pop out the 3 of clubs on top. And then they would do all these other things with the cards, and then they'd pop out the 3 of clubs. And it was very funny, right? Like the way they kept bringing up the 3 of clubs, even though they were doing all these things to manipulate the deck. Later that same evening, a magician who had not been there when that trick was done came in, and he pulled the magician who was doing the original trick, and he started doing a trick with him, and he was just like, okay, pick a card. And it happened to be the 3 of clubs. And I happened to be on the side where I could see it, and I just laughed, and I turned to the magician who had picked the 3 of clubs, and I said, that's irony. Nobody on the other side of the room knew what we meant because they couldn't see the card, and the magician who wasn't there for the original trick didn't know what we meant. And he's like, okay, I don't know what that means, but let's keep going. So he kept going with his little trick. And then later at the end of it, when he said, here's your card, and everyone could see it, the whole room busted up laughing, and they were just like, oh my gosh, it's the 3 of clubs again. Now, one could say that it almost seems like those 2 magicians must have planned this, because how could the 3 of clubs come up in the next trick with no, it just seems like that wouldn't just randomly happen, and yet it did. And because
I hear.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying, and I see that, and I've considered that. That's why I said I didn't just, like I said, I grew up in an agnostic home, and I spent years going back and forth in my mind between this, because I get that, right? But then one could say that, maybe for all you know, I'm not saying this is the case, but it is theoretically possible. Maybe that was a pre-planned thing, that they pre-planned it before they went to the party. Now, I'm not saying that they actually did that.
Right, but I would have no reason to believe that it was, I guess is my point.
What I'm interested in, Mark, if I can, is it sounds like this idea of things appearing designed, you're surfacing it as one of the reasons why you think that your God is real. And I'm wondering is if all of these instances...
That's just scratching the surface.
Got it.
Reason
I got it. And it was one example that you mentioned, which is why I'm kind of focusing on it. If every instance of design, things that you think are being designed, could be shown to your satisfaction that they were not designed, that they could form naturally, okay? And you were convinced by the evidence that was shown to you. Would that affect your confidence in the God existing in any way?
Sure, I guess, but I I can't even fathom how you'd go about doing that. What method you could even come up with to do that. That's
okay. It sounds like you are open to hearing people explain how these things could happen.
No, I've read people's theories. Like I said, I'm well aware of Lawrence Krauss's book, Universal Nothing. Mm-hmm. I'm just not terribly convinced by their arguments. Like specific to Lawrence Krauss, I've heard him say in panel board discussions, interviews, and debates that he doesn't want to live in a universe where God exists, that the thought of God's existence is depressing for him. Now, that to me tells me he has a prejudicial biased view. How do I know he's not skewing his information to perfectly slant to say that there's no such thing as God? How do I know he's being honest and objective? He's still a human being.
Sure.
Like, he's a well-accomplished scientist, but he's still a human being.
Right. Yeah, we absolutely have our biases, and I think that's a good question, and I think that should be something that would have to be addressed before I would accept evidence too. Is there some inherent bias going on here? Is this person have an agenda? That type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what I'm saying is right, like, what secular atheistic people, scientists like Lawrence Krauss, Richard Dawkins, Neil deGrasse Tyson, I can list them all off, right? What they say about Christian scientists like Ken Ham and, some of the other famous ones, Kent Hovind and whatever, like they're purposely skewing information to make the Bible true. Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. How do I know they're not doing that to make the anti-biblical, anti-God view be true?
Right. No, I understand that would be a concern, especially when you hear, well, how caustic we can be towards the other side. Like, I totally get that one might be less reluctant or less willing to accept a claim or evidence because of the concern of bias. Like, it's very hard to set aside one's bias when you're presenting evidence. But,
right, and that's why, like, to answer your question, if my burden of proof was satisfied and I was convinced there's no funny business, no scamming going on here, then I would be willing to consider the possibility of everything coming from randomness and chaos, just natural stuff. But
good.
As it stands right now, I don't see anything that convinces me that that's possible. Everything I see...
and I see the opposite. Like, what I see is a natural universe that does everything the natural universe does, and no evidence that there is an agent, a more complex agent that has produced it. Like, I don't see evidence of the agent, but I see plenty of evidence for the natural universe.
So that's kind of
and I get that, Tracy. Like, and I realize that everybody has their right to see the universe from their own perspective view, and that's why we naturally attract to like-minded people who will see things similar to.
But I didn't. I guess my story is that I was a believer, and I got myself out of the church by studying the history of the church, the history of the Bible, and realized that this was all man-made. And then when I went on for another 10 years investigating what is God, I couldn't really locate God. I couldn't figure out what God was. I couldn't label it or identify it, or there was nothing that I could find that I could actually say this is God. Like, what is there? I mean, what is God?
That's interesting. What you said, that was actually the exact opposite.
No, I know, because I heard your description earlier, but I guess what I'm wondering then is do you agree that things that do not exist cannot be the cause of other things?
Things that do not exist yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. And I mean that in a broad context. Like, at some point it must have existed in order to cause something. It may not exist now. You know what I mean? Some things create things and then they stop existing. And I get that, but in essence, a thing has to exist or have existed in order to be a cause. And so when we say that God is the cause of the universe, our next step has to be to demonstrate that cause God exists, not just to give a hypothesis for why we think that it's necessary, but we actually have to take that next step of validating that there is an existent God.
I can answer that, though.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm assuming you sound like a very smart, clever woman.
And I'm not. But thank you.
I'm assuming you know what prejudicial bias views are in psychology.
Sure, I understand prejudice. I understand bias.
It's like
we all have biases. We all have biases. Yeah. Okay, so if
like for example, for instance, the emergence and explosion of the early Christian church. Now, some people like yourself will look at that and say, well, that could have happened within naturalistic bounds, and there doesn't necessarily mean that this is a supernatural divine intervention that caused this. And sure, that is a relative possibility, but it doesn't dismiss the possibility that there's a supernatural agent behind.
But why would I invoke a supernatural agent when I know that an emperor promoted the religion? I mean, if you make it the state religion, it's going to take off.
Not till the end of the 3rd century AD.
Yeah, and they were subversive up until much later. I mean, the Gospels themselves weren't written for, decades, maybe even a century after. I mean, this is the idea that the church took off is there's a movement gaining traction is hardly evidence of the supernatural.
Okay, but my point is the fact that the conditions that it came up in, and I'm applying personal life experience here, and the naturalistic aspect of my personal life experience, because I got saved in jail. So I know personally what it's like to feel hunted and chased, like the whole world's out to get you. And I can tell you with personal life experience, if I knew the Roman Empire was out to get me, I'm not going out in public squares praising Jesus Christ, knowing they're kicking in doors looking for me.
Right, but you understand that there are zealots who do, and there are movements. I mean, look at, for example, ISIS. That's a horrible movement, and you would almost ask yourself, how in the world would anyone join it? And yet they are collecting followers, right? Even though the whole world is hunting them. It happens, and they are famous, they are growing. They are dangerous and awful, and yet they continue to gain traction, even though they are the antithesis of everything good. And
okay, but we've only observed that for a decade or two. But we're talking like 3 centuries that the Roman Empire did everything they could within their means to try to crush and obliterate white.
Well, you're assuming that right at the beginning they even cared about this. Mainly, Rome was.
What about Nero?
Yes,
Nero.
Rome didn't care. Yeah, please.
Okay, we have like 6 other callers online.
Fair enough.
But
Okay.
but one question here. You don't have to answer it now. You can answer it later if you want. But it seems like you have a very high standard for people who could show that your belief is not true. Do you hold yourself to the same standard? Are you just as careful about bias and prejudices and all these other things as you are for your
absolutely.
own belief? You are, okay.
Absolutely, because I have to be, because that's, like I said, I came to this belief while I was in prison, and this is applying all of the critical thinking skills I learned in my therapy to overcome drinking, drugs, and crime. And my concern was, am I being biased because I grew up in an agnostic home? Am I being open-minded and objective to the possibility that this could be true? And if this has any bound to help me, like I've read so many people worldwide, millions upon millions of testimonies of people worldwide who have overcome.
I still don't understand. I mean, first of all, I still don't feel like I've gotten an answer to the original question of how is a pile of rubble the same as a skyscraper. But I also don't know where is the demonstration of the cause God? Does God exist now, or did it exist before and it no longer exists?
Well, like I'm saying, all these different things.
Does it exist? Wait, does it exist right now?
Yes.
Okay, can you please tell me where, in what way does it exist? In what way can we demonstrate it? Because what good is existence that cannot be demonstrated? It's no different than not existing.
Other than the evidence of transformed, redeemed lives of people who've overcome.
No, you're talking about, you're saying that the cause God is causing these transformed lives. I'm not asking you to show me what you think the hypothesis of God is causing these things. I'm saying, where is the God? Because it has to, things that do not exist cannot cause other things. Does this God exist? And if so, in what form and where is the direct demonstration of the God?
Okay, but just because I can't demonstrate that God doesn't exist does not mean that God doesn't exist.
But it does mean that God can't be told from something that doesn't exist. A thing that you cannot demonstrate exists is no different than a thing that you cannot, that doesn't exist. How do we tell things that don't exist from things we can't tell whether they exist or not?
Okay, well, when I pray to a pink unicorn, nothing happens. When I pray
what do you mean? There's actually, if I pray to a pink unicorn that I find a parking space, I might find a parking space. Right?
Yeah, but will it transform your life and give you the power to overcome drinking, drugs, and crime?
If you could, the thing is, you can transform your own life. People do it all the time. And so this is not evidence for a God. This is evidence that lives are transformed. You're claiming that the cause is God, and I'm saying that the cause of you, right, you doing it yourself, you exist and may be a cause of this thing. If the God is going to be a cause of it, you have to show that God exists as much as you can show you exist. In what way does this God exist?
Okay, fine. Let me close with this because you got other callers. How would you propose I do that? Like, because I know
you're saying it exists. I'm asking you. You say you believe it exists, that you're aware of it, and so you're saying it can be a cause. Therefore, this thing must be manifesting in some way. Can you please just demonstrate the manifestation that you seem to be aware of that I'm not?
I'm not sure how to do that.
Yeah, I don't think I'm sure how to do that either. And that's what makes me think that we can't use it as a cause. We cannot plug in God as a cause until we can demonstrate there actually is a God, because things that do not exist cannot be the cause of other things. That means that if we're going to include it among the possible causes, it has to at least be known to exist, and we don't know that about your God.
So just to wrap this up, I think, Mark, in closing, I think you're asking good questions. Like, you just asked a great question. How could I figure this out? How could I test it? How could I show that this is true? Those are the types of questions that I would encourage you to keep asking, and feel free to reach out to us or to me directly if you want to keep talking about this. But I think you're on the right track, honestly. I mean, I think of course there's some things that are flawed there, but I
really appreciate the call. I mean, to be honest, I'm really glad that you called, and I think it's a good call, and I think that a lot of the people that are watching are going to appreciate your call. So even though I can be a little rah, 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 I know that I want you to know that I'm glad that you called, and I liked the call.
Okay. I actually didn't get to talk about the topic I wanted to.
Okay. Sleep paralysis is what they said.
Okay.
You were on.
Yeah.
But
oh, was that?
you know what? Post it at the blog if you want to. There's a lot of people that had some interest in that, and so you might get a little conversation going there.
Okay. Thank you,
right.
Tracy.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, Mark, thanks.
Okay.
I love how he recognized that he didn't really have a good way of testing.
Well, I mean, like you said, he can think about that more, and maybe he'll come up with something. I mean, to be fair, there's a lot of people who have had difficult, like, hypotheses that had, sometimes when I see how somebody comes up with a way to demonstrate something, I'm amazed. Because there are many times when I've sat and seen something, like been reading about a theory or reading about a hypothesis, and I thought, oh my gosh, how would you even test that? And they come up with some idea that I'm like mind blown.
Yeah.
You know, here's how you can test it. And I thought, wow, that is so creative, that is so intelligent that someone came up with that, because I would be the worst person. If my job was to test hypotheses, we wouldn't know anything, because I would just be like, I don't know how you would test this.
What I found interesting about that last call was that he didn't lead with the personal experiences that helped him through, I think he said he was struggling with addiction or something like that, substance abuse. And I'm not sure why you didn't lead with that, but it sounds like that was a big part of why you think that that's true.
It might have been why he looked into it, or how he got introduced to the ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. I'm not going to go down the road of, questioning how he actually came to believe, but I felt like, at least he did say that if you could demonstrate some of these things were not what he thought, he would rethink the views, and he has looked into this. And so, I did appreciate that at least he would acknowledge that. Oftentimes, much to my dismay, people will call in to argue a particular apologetic, and it has nothing to do with why they believe what they believe. I mean, even they're not convinced by it.
And that's why I like asking that question, to see if are we talking about something that really has an impact on your belief.
There was a huge element of honesty to Mark's call that we do not get from a lot of people that argue apologetics.
Yeah, I hope that doesn't get overshadowed, because that was good.